Israel ramps up its military campaign by bombing Iranian targets inside Syria. That's after the Syrian regime downed an Israeli jet. Is this the start of a new phase in the conflict? I'm Imran Garda, and today's newsmaker is the soaring tension between Israel and Iran. For the first time in more than 30 years, an Israeli plane has been shot out of the sky. A Syrian regime missile took out the fighter jet after a wave of Israeli airstrikes hit Iranian targets inside Syria. They were in response to what the Israelis say was an Iranian drone launched from Syria that entered the airspace over the occupied Golan Heights. Iran calls the claim ridiculous. Nevertheless, the Israeli military retaliated with its heaviest air raid on Syria in decades. Russia is urging all sides to show restraint. But will that be enough to prevent a showdown between Israel and Iran? That debate in a moment, but first, here's this report by Christine Pirovolakis.
I've been warning for some time about the dangers of Iran's military entrenchment in Syria. Iran seeks to use Syrian territory to attack Israel for its professed goal of destroying Israel. This morning, Iran brazenly violated Israel's sovereignty. They dispatched an Iranian drone from Syrian territory into Israel, and this demonstrates that our warnings were 100% correct. Israel holds Iran and its Syrian host responsible for today's aggression. We will continue to do whatever is necessary to protect our sovereignty and our security.
Israel launched raids against Iranian and Syrian targets after intercepting and destroying the drone. Israel jets flew into Syria, and the Syrian regime launched anti-aircraft missiles in retaliation. In the end, a plane was hit, going down in northern Israel. In response, Israel says it carried out a second wave of airstrikes on Syria, its heaviest against the country since 1982.
از طریق تقویت تروریسم یا مداخله در کشورهای دیگر یا بمباران کشورهای همسایه می تواند به نتایج مطلوبی برسد در خطا و اشتباه است. ما آمادگی داریم برای امنیت منطقه بیش از گذشته فعال باشیم و در این راستا همکاری همه کشورها را طالب هستیم.
It raises the question, is Israel increasingly being drawn into a fight against Iran and Syria? Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss all of this, I'm joined from Jerusalem by Alan Baker. He's a former Israeli ambassador and used to be a legal advisor to the Israeli army. In London, we have Russia expert and political commentator Marcus Papadopoulos. And completing our panel, we have Mohammed Marandi. He's a professor at the University of Tehran. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. There's a bunch of things for us to kind of get through here because it's been a busy week, right? We have the Iranian drone. Iran says they didn't send a drone entering Israeli airspace, downed by Israel. Israel bombing Syrian regime positions where they say the Iranians are operating. Syria shooting down an Israeli F-16 jet. And Israel, of course, building a wall along the border with Lebanon that Lebanon says is on their side of the border. Lots to get through, all interconnected, that we will get through over the next 20 minutes or so. But let me begin with a very basic question to you, Alan Baker. At the moment, who is provoking whom? Is Israel provoking Iran or is Iran provoking Israel?
No, the fact that Iran sent a drone into Israeli sovereign territory would appear to me to be an example of a provocation by Iran. So I don't think there's any room for doubt.
No room for doubt, Mohammed Marandi?
Obviously, it's the Israeli regime that's provocative, as it always is. There was no drone, and all drones that are active in Syria, they are there to fight against ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the Israeli regime, as we all know, is cooperating with Al-Qaeda on its border. The former head of Mossad admitted that the Israelis actually treat the wounded Al-Qaeda soldiers, the Nusra Front soldiers. And the former defense minister of Israel said that once ISIS lobbed a mortar into Israel and immediately apologized. So we know the sort of relationship that they have. And even if, let's imagine that a drone strayed into their territory. Is that comparable to the constant airstrikes that the Israeli regime carries out against Syrian government positions, or the fact that the Israeli regime sends its Air Force jets over Lebanon to attack Syria? There's no comparison. So I think the Israeli regime really has to reconsider what it sees as a provocation.
Yeah, before I bring in Marcus, let me get a response from you, Alan, and just add to it. I mean, what does Israel want? Is it merely to respond and scupper whether it's Hezbollah or other Iranian militias within Syria, or does Israel have greater designs and greater intentions of getting more involved in the Syrian war?
No, Israel's got absolutely no intention of getting involved in anything like that. Israel just wants to ensure its own security, and Israel considers that the presence of Iran in Syria, by Iran's own declarations, it constitutes a very serious threat to Israel. And Israel has warned Iran several times that it won't countenance its presence or its building up of facilities to assist Hezbollah and other terrorist groups in order to attack Israel. And as to the question whether this was or wasn't a drone, and it was or wasn't sent to Israel, well, we have the drone, we have the evidence that it was an Iranian drone, and anybody who doubts that should just look at the film and the footage which shows that this was an Iranian drone and it was sent into Israel. So if anybody doubts that, then he's just imagining and he's deluding himself and deluding your listeners.
Okay, so you both disagree over the drone. I want to pop out into the geopolitics a little. Marcus, one of the reasons why we invited you is you can help us understand the geopolitical angle, especially from the Russian perspective. And they've been interesting because the Israelis have essentially bombed two Russian allies in this war in Syria, the Syrian regime and the Iranians. Russia hasn't retaliated. Russia has condemned it, which has led some to believe that the Russians have given the Israelis the green light to act. Is that plausible?
No, I don't believe that's plausible at all. We have to remember that Russia has a very different stance on Israel compared to the stance that the former Soviet Union adopted towards Israel. Now, I don't happen to believe that the current day Russian policy on Israel is actually correct, but under no circumstances did Russia give the green light to Israel to attack Syria at the weekend. Russia is trying to diffuse the situation. Russia has a fairly cordial relationship with Israel, and Mr. Putin made it very clear that Syria's sovereignty must be respected, and he told Mr. Netanyahu that in no uncertain terms. But Imran, if I may, the audacity of Israeli officials to cite the argument of sovereignty being violated is really extraordinary. Israel routinely violates Syrian airspace, thereby Syrian sovereignty, thereby international law. And the Israelis do it under the banner of defensive measures. Well, that is absolutely preposterous nonsense. If every country in the world behaved in the same manner as the Israelis do, there would be Armageddon. Israel is not above international law. Israel is not above the mechanisms of the United Nations. If Israel has a complaint, it should take it to the United Nations. And I will say this as well. Why doesn't our Israeli guest explain why Israel does not use its formidable air power against ISIS and Al-Qaeda
let me
in the
ask,
Golan, which is only a stone's throw away from Turkish forces.
That's an interesting
maybe he
point.
can answer that question.
That's an interesting point. So, Alan Baker, one of the questions is, as much as you might hate Hezbollah and as much as they might be a national security threat to Israel, there's clear evidence that Hezbollah in the Golan Heights actively fights Khalid bin al-Walid forces, which are a Daesh affiliate, right? So they're fighting them in the Golan Heights, but Israel wants to bomb Hezbollah. Doesn't Marcus make a fair point? Why is Hezbollah more of an enemy than an actual Daesh affiliate in the Golan Heights?
Look, whoever doesn't threaten Israel, Israel's got no reason to defend itself against them. That's the very simple formula.
So you believe it's correct to treat Al-Qaeda fighters
as long as
in your
Hezbollah,
hospitals? Is that correct?
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. Would you please be cultured and allow me to speak?
I think the world should know why Israel treats wounded Al-Qaeda fighters in their hospitals.
If you're not, I'm sorry, you're interrupting me,
Go ahead,
which is very impolite.
Al-Qaeda is a murderous evil organisation,
no, I'm
and
sorry.
you treat their fighters in your hospitals.
Okay, Marcus,
if you're not allowing me,
Marcus, you made the point a few times. Alan, please go ahead.
If you're not allowing me to speak,
you're allowed to speak.
If
Go
you're
ahead,
not
Alan.
allowing me to speak, then there's no sense in continuing this discussion. I'm sorry. My answer to the question was that Israel will act only against those elements that threaten its sovereignty and its security. And if Hezbollah constitutes a threat to Israel's security, then Israel will find it necessary to defend itself. But if Hezbollah is acting against ISIS or whoever else it's acting against, that's got nothing to do with Israel, and it doesn't bother Israel.
Mohammed Marandi, the Israelis believe fundamentally that Iran is using the strategic advantage that it has in Syria right now, with the momentum being with the kind of Russian-Iranian Syrian government alliance. So they believe Iran is using that momentum to create a strategic advantage to then use to attack Israel through Hezbollah and others. Is that nonsense, or might there be some truth to it?
No, the Israelis don't even think that. That's the narrative of Israel. Israel is like its sister apartheid, the sister apartheid regime in South Africa that existed before. The apartheid regime in South Africa would constantly use communism to demonize the ANC.
Will you get to the point?
And the West would support of the apartheid regime. And that is exactly what the Israelis do.
Okay,
so
Alan,
even Nelson Mandela was considered to be a terrorist by the United States.
You're spouting cliches.
He's interrupting me.
Answer the question.
So this is what Israel does. It uses Iran as a scapegoat to justify the subjugation of the natives in Palestine, the Palestinian people, and to attack neighboring countries. Israel has no drone of Iran over its territory. It did not shoot it down. The Israelis bombed Syria on regular. And to answer Marcus, because he raised a good question, Marcus asked a good question.
I don't remember what the question was.
Why does Israel not attack ISIS? The defense intelligence chief of Israel
because ISIS isn't attacking Israel.
That Israel would prefer ISIS to the Syrian government, and that Israel is concerned
why should Israel attack
about
ISIS
the defeat of ISIS.
Isn't attacking Israel.
So when the Minister of Defense, the former Minister of Defense, the former head of Mossad, and the head of military intelligence for Israel speak like that, it shows the relationship between Israel and the extremists.
Alan, let me ask you this.
Israel gives humanitarian assistance. Israel helps people who are wounded.
Can I jump in?
It doesn't matter where they come from.
Okay, Alan, let me ask you. Marcus, I'm going to come to you in a second. Marcus, I'm going to come to you in a second. Alan, let me ask you. Hezbollah, interestingly, said the downing of the Israeli F-16 marked the start of a new strategic phase. And they also said today's developments mean the old equations have categorically ended. When you hear that from Hezbollah, Alan, as somebody who advised the Israeli army, the IDF, what do you think they mean, Alan?
I don't think they mean anything. They're simply persuading themselves that they've achieved a major victory without really taking into consideration what exactly happened on Saturday. How many Iranian and Syrian positions were destroyed as a result of this drone entering into Israeli territory. So they're simply misleading themselves and their public into believing that this was a great victory they managed to shoot down an Israeli plane. It's a new game. It's a load of rubbish, I'm sorry.
Marcus, you want to jump in?
Al-Qaeda is one of the most vile, repugnant, evil organizations in the world. In fact, one of the most evil that mankind has ever known. It massacred thousands of innocent civilians on 9/11. It massacred civilians in Madrid, in Bali, in London. The list goes on and on and on. And Israel treats Al-Qaeda fighters who have been wounded in battle against the Syrian army. The Israelis treat Al-Qaeda fighters in Israeli hospitals. The world should know that.
We'd even treat you, Marcus,
the world
if
should
you were
know
wounded.
that Israel is allied unofficially to both Al-Qaeda and ISIS. In my opinion, Al-Qaeda fighters should be left to die on the battlefield. But for the Israelis, they treat them in their hospitals and then they send them back into the Golan to fight the Syrian army. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself for treating Al-Qaeda fighters
Marcus,
and for
we're
supporting
not as cruel
the
as
treatment
you.
of Al-Qaeda
So
fighters.
if your hatred is so deep
I think
that
Israel
you're
knows a lot
prepared to
about
leave
cruelty
wounded
towards
people, then you have a
Palestinians.
problem with yourself, Marcus.
You do not
You have a
treat
problem,
Al-Qaeda
Marcus.
fighters.
I suggest you get examined.
Go to Washington, go to New York and say that to the families of the victims of 9/11, that it's a good thing to treat Al-Qaeda fighters. I don't believe it's good to treat Al-Qaeda
Marcus,
fighters.
you're
I
getting
believe
off
they should
the
be left
point
to die on
again.
the battlefield.
Okay, I think
You're
it's
getting
pretty
off
clear
the
that you
point,
both disagree
Marcus.
over this. Okay, fair enough. And Alan says, well, Al-Qaeda's not firing rockets at them, so they don't have a problem with them for the moment. That's where he stands. Marcus, this is where we leave you.
Why don't Al-Qaeda attack Israel? That's a good question, isn't it?
Okay, this is interesting, and you've posed some interesting questions. Marcus, this is where we leave you at this point in the discussion, because we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the border wall in Lebanon, but I thank you so much for your contribution. Alan, you stay where you are. Mohammed Marandi, you stay where you are. Yeah. I want to move on now because Israel's strikes inside Syria are often intended to prevent Iranian weapons reaching Hezbollah in Lebanon. Another way the Israeli government says it's trying to protect itself is by beefing up a wall along the Lebanese border. But since it looks set to pass through Lebanese land, it's only ratcheting up tensions. Here's Christine Provolakis once more.
Good fences don't always make for good neighbors. That's particularly obvious here, where Israel has begun building a concrete wall along its northern border with Lebanon. It will stretch from the Mediterranean Sea in the west, all the way up to the kibbutz of Miskavam in the east. This border is one of the most volatile in the Middle East. It was drawn up by the United Nations almost 2 decades ago to prevent confrontations, with the so-called Blue Line rubber stamping Israel's withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Once again, Lebanon has accused Israel of threatening stability and warned against passing through its territory.
This wall, if built, will be considered an assault on Lebanese land, and we have been given instructions to confront this aggression to prevent Israel from building it.
Israel says the wall will be built entirely on its side of the UN-recognized border and considers using barrier structures one of the most effective measures of combating terror and keeping the Lebanese Shia group Hezbollah at bay. The border fence with Lebanon has been upgraded a number of times since it was first built in the 1980s. And the new 6-meter-high concrete and razor wire fence will be similar to what Israel has on its Egyptian, Syrian, and Jordanian frontiers. But at a price tag of more than $100 million, security hasn't come cheap. Israel and Lebanon are officially in a state of war. Israel fought Hezbollah in 2006. The month-long conflict killed around 1,200 people, mostly civilians in Lebanon, and 160 Israelis, most of them soldiers. Today, hostilities between them have been limited to occasional firing across the border. But days ago, Israel carried out its largest strikes on Iranian targets in Syria in decades. Israeli strikes are often to prevent Iranian munitions from reaching Hezbollah. The United Nations says it's working with both sides as the wall goes up to prevent misunderstanding and decrease tension. But Israel and Lebanon don't just have unresolved land border disputes between them. They are also both claiming an area of sea around 800 square kilometers, believed to be rich in oil and gas reserves. The zone extends along the edge of 3 out of 5 energy blocks that Lebanon put to tender early last year. Israel says it does not seek to escalate an already tense situation. But with territorial and maritime boundary disputes still so strained, could conflict between Israel and Lebanon be on the horizon? Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
I'm joined now by Andrea Tenenti in Beirut. He's the spokesman for the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, which exists to keep the peace along the Israeli-Lebanese border. Andrea, UNIFIL's been around for a long, long time. It's seen lots of problems come and go. What's UNIFIL's position on Israel's decision to build this wall?
At the moment, UNIFIL leadership, our force commander, head of mission, Major General Michael Berry, is working with the parties, is fully engaged with the parties to try to find a common solution to this issue. We have been working for quite some time with both of the parties, IDF and Lebanese Army, in order to find, as I said, a common solutions. It's important to emphasize that in even the last tripartite meeting, there was another one today. That's the moment, that's the meeting where both countries, IDF and Lebanese Army, are meeting together with UNIFIL. They both confirmed their commitment to use UNIFIL and our coordination mechanisms to try to find a solution. So both parties also confirmed their commitment to the cessation of hostilities.
Okay, that's great. Can I ask you very directly, on whose side of the border is it being built? Because the Israelis say it's on their side of the border, the Lebanese say you're building on our land. What's the UN's position?
Well, at the moment, the work they have been carrying out in these days, a few days ago, was south of the blue line, so not in sensitive areas. Around that area, along the blue line, the line of withdrawal, there are several sensitive areas, and that's what we're working on now with the parties to try to find a common solution. At the moment, the work done is south of the blue line, so not in Lebanese territory.
Okay, so south of the blue line, so it seems as if you support the Israeli argument right now. We have the Lebanese Higher Defense Council saying in a statement, this wall, if it is built, will be considered an assault on Lebanese land. Does that give you an indication as to just how much work you have ahead of you in terms of trying to keep the peace?
Yeah, you know, these are very sensitive areas, and that's why a UN peacekeeping mission is there, and that's why we are committed to try to find solutions to these issues and try to decrease tension. It's important also to emphasize that in the last 12 years after the cessation of hostilities in 2006, the south of Lebanon has witnessed one of its quietest period in recent history. And it's important that both parties are willing to preserve the stability. And during all our tripartite meetings, bilateral or trilateral meetings, we have been able to ensure this stability. So even in this case, we are really fully engaged and working hard to ensure that we find a common solution. At the moment, the situation in the south is stable, but as I said, we are fully engaged to find solution to these specific areas.
Andrea Tenenti, I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let's bring back former Israeli Ambassador Alan Baker and Tehran University Professor Mohammad Marandi, and introducing a new guest from Beirut, Hisham Jabbar. He's a retired Lebanese Army general. General Jabbar, good to have you on the program. We just spoke to UNIFIL, and they say that at the moment, all the work that the Israelis are doing is south of the blue line, which means that it's on Israeli territory, so the Lebanese presumably should have nothing to worry about. Is that how you see it?
No, not at all. There is a big difference between the blue line and the international border between Lebanon and Israel. The blue line was drawn in 200. Some places, they meet each other, the international border and the blue line. And in some places, there is difference 1 kilometer. I think when Lebanon said it's inside that its territory, Lebanon is right, absolutely right, and Israel trying to make aggression against Lebanon. And second, and UNIFIL, and I don't think the UNIFIL has the power to put on Israel, put pressure. UNIFIL is only coordinator. They have several meetings, the three parties in Nakura, South Lebanon, and they told Israel to stop building. Sometime stop, sometime it continues. I think we have to solve the problem peacefully, because Lebanon did decide to be one strong front against this Israeli threat. Lebanon, people of Lebanon, governors of Lebanon, and the army in Lebanon. And Lebanon will use all means, diplomatic, including military means, to stop Israel to make this aggression.
Let me ask Alan Baker. Alan Baker, so the Israelis feel they need this wall. As you heard from Hisham Jabbar, the Lebanese see it as an aggressive wall and not a defensive wall. Does Israel really need this problem right now? An additional problem? You're fighting the Iranians via proxy in Syria and now poking Hezbollah by building a wall.
Well, let me explain. Before working with the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, I was with Israel's foreign ministry, and I was involved in working with the United Nations in demarcating the blue line. Now, there's no such thing as an Israeli-Lebanese boundary. When I was negotiating with the Lebanese in the 1980s, we came to an agreement, but the agreement never entered into force because the Syrians wouldn't allow it, and that would have produced a bilateral, mutually recognized boundary, but there's no such thing. The UN demarcated the blue line, and according to the UN resolution 1701, both parties agreed that they would be behind that line. Now, the reason that Israel is building a wall in various places, not along the whole line, is simply because we're aware of the fact that Hezbollah are planning to carry out various aggressive acts, including taking over Israeli villages and towns. And this is something that we want to prevent, and that's the reason for this wall. If there would be no such threat, then there'd be no need for building this wall.
So, Mohammed Marandi, does that sound reasonable to you? They want to keep out Hezbollah, no more, no less. They're building a wall. This has nothing to do with the greater geopolitics of fighting Iran through Lebanon.
Look, Imran, this is not a proxy war. Lebanon is a country. Hezbollah is defending its territory. Israel invaded Lebanon. Israel killed tens of thousands of people in Lebanon in multiple invasions. So they are defending their country, and they expelled the Israeli regime from their country. So they're a national resistance front. In Syria, the Israelis constantly bomb Syrian army positions in defense of the Nusra Front, Al-Qaeda Syria. This is not a proxy war.
Back to the
this
point.
is an attack on the Syrian army in order to help the extremists get the upper hand. So
we're talking
when your
about
guest
the
is
wall.
uncomfortable, he becomes intolerant about what is going on. The reality on the ground is that the Israeli regime is occupying the Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria, and
we're talking
part
about
of that
Lebanon.
territory is Syrian territory, which is on the Lebanese border. It is a part of Lebanon. But in any case, at the end of the day, what is important is that Syria has defeated an attempt by the Israeli regime to launch an attack on its country. The Israelis lost a very sophisticated F-16. They pretend that they hurt the Syrians and the Iranians. They did not carry out any significant strike on the Iranians. The Iranians believe that that Netanyahu has been humiliated, so he needs to justify the loss of the F-16. And the Iranians also believe that the real reason behind the attack has more to do with Netanyahu's problems at home. The fact that he and his wife are facing corruption charges is causing him difficulty.
Maybe let's talk about
and
the
this
wall.
has led him to carry out these attacks to distract attention away from his problems at home. So, and one other point that I'd like to add at the end is that when the Israeli former head of Mossad said that we treat the Al-Qaeda injured combatants, he also added, when asked by Al Jazeera, the reporter, would you treat Hezbollah combatants? And he said no. So this is not an issue of humanitarian assistance. It is support for extremism, the same extremists that carried out 9/11.
Okay.
And
I don't want to. Okay.
No
and you've made the point, Mohammed.
that.
Both you and Marcus
all
made the
of this
point.
is well documented.
Okay, fair
and
enough.
all of this is in the open.
Fair enough. You made the point, and Marcus
Get
made
to
it
the
as well.
point.
General Jabbar, let me bring you in here, because from the Lebanese perspective, I doubt many people want a repeat of 2006 and prior conflicts, because while it might be triggered by Hezbollah and Israel, it becomes Israel versus all of Lebanon, essentially. You've got a complicated country and political system, but Lebanon suffers a whole lot when that happens. Are you preparing for the worst, given everything we've discussed, everything regarding what's happening in Syria, everything regarding what's happening on the border with Lebanon? You've been around for a long, long time. Should we all be preparing for another war in Lebanon that's going to happen with Israel?
No, no at all. Israel want every day revenge since 2006. Every year prepare a war against Lebanon. But Israel discover at the end of the day, it cannot face that war and have the consequences of this war. And year after year, they discover Hezbollah became stronger and stronger, and this is the closed cycle. Israel will not involve itself in a war against Lebanon.
Unfortunately, I've got to wrap because we have gone over time. General Jabbar, I do apologize. I have to wrap because we're completely out of time in the segment and we're going to lose all of you at the moment. The fault is all mine.
Can't I respond? Can't I respond to
I'm
this?
sorry, Alan, because we're completely out of time. The fault is mine. I apologize, but I hope you feel on the balance of the discussion, everybody had a fair amount to say. Alan Baker, Hisham Jabbar, Mohammed Marandi.
No, I think I've been the target of everybody, and I'm entitled to respond. And you know, Lebanon is a beautiful country, but it's been taken hostage by Hezbollah, and they're ruining the country. And the general is in a very unfortunate
beautiful country.
position.
That's why Israel wants to invade it all the time. That's why the Israelis go and massacre
Israel protected
Palestinians
itself
in
against
the
Hezbollah
refugee camps because they
And,
love Lebanon
I've traveled
without
extensively in
Palestinians and
Lebanon.
Lebanese.
Okay, Alan, I hope
I've
you
traveled
consider that
extensively
sufficient
in
as a
Lebanon.
response. I hope
I
you
know,
consider
when
that
you invaded it.
sufficient as a response. Mohammed,
I know.
Alan, Hisham, I apologize, but I really have to move on. I've got other segments to get
Leave
to.
Lebanon alone.
Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Hope you'll come back on the show. Still to come on the Newsmakers, protests break out across Bangladesh as the main opposition leader is imprisoned for corruption. But is this about upholding the rule of law or political vengeance? And Iraq says it needs $100 billion to rebuild after fighting Daesh. Where will all that money come from? Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Bangladesh's opposition leader Khalida Zia may be in a jail cell, but she's not going down without a fight. After being sentenced to 5 years in prison for corruption, the former Prime Minister is appealing the verdict. But it may not be enough to secure her freedom. There are currently more than 30 cases against her. And if she beats this one, there'll be another around the corner. With an election set for later this year, her supporters say it's all politically motivated, with the timing appearing a little too good to be true for the current Prime Minister. Here's Shoaib Hassan.
It's the latest conviction in Bangladesh's recent series of trials of opposition politicians. Former Prime Minister Khalida Zia has been jailed for 5 years on charges of corruption. Her party says the trial is a political vendetta against her and her family.
We think Khalida Zia is innocent. She has given us the decision to file an appeal. We have applied today. We have applied for the certified copy.
The verdict prompted her supporters to protest, with dozens injured and fighting with security forces. prosecution is taking place under the government of her main political rival, Prime Minister Hasina Wajid. Her father and Bangladesh's founder, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, was killed in a 1975 coup. That's when Khaleda Zia's husband was army chief, giving the rivalry a personal touch. Khaleda Zia later won Bangladesh's first free and fair elections in 1991. He's since been engaged in a series of political fights with Wajid, earning them the title the Battling Begums, a term meaning a high-ranking Muslim woman. Either one or the other ruled Bangladesh from 1991 to 2006. That ended with another military coup in 2007, followed by an anti-corruption drive that saw cases being filed against both Zia and Hasina Wajid. The charges could not stick at the time. But Wajid's party won the election in 2008, and prosecutors reopened the cases against Zia and other opposition politicians. Human rights groups say the trials have been flawed, but they have helped Wajid consolidate power. The only real obstacle in her way has been Khaleda Zia. So, is it just a coincidence that justice is also convenient? Or could the case be politically motivated? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined now from Rome by Mohidur Rahman. He's the Secretary for International Affairs with the opposition Bangladesh National Party, or BNP. And from London, Yusuf Salim. He's a Secretary General with the ruling Awami League. Gentlemen, good to talk to you. Important time in Bangladesh. Mohidur Rahman, let me start with you. So the Law and Parliamentary Affairs Minister, Anisul Haq, said, and I quote, "The verdict proves no one is above the law." He believes it was a fair verdict. 5-year jail sentence for Khaleda Zia for embezzling money. That's justice, right? Whether you like it or not, it's justice.
Yes, we also believe that no one is above the law, but obviously law has to be utilized fairly and justly. Unfortunately, the political case that has been, filed up against the BNP chairperson, former Prime Minister Begum Khaleda Zia, and the senior Vice Chairman, Mr. Tariq Rahman, these are all politically motivated cases because these cases have no basis at all. And this is basically done in order to disqualify these two leaders of BNP from the next forthcoming election. And that is why, this justice is totally, the judgment was given very unfairly and administratively. It is politically done with the influence of the government.
Okay,
political. That is why, we are strongly opposing this. Thank you very much.
Okay, so political witch hunt. Let's ask the man from the Awami League, Muhammad Yusuf Salim. This is essentially just the government trying to knock out the opposition, no more, no less.
According to the law of the land in Bangladesh, I think Law Minister is 100% right to say that nobody is above the law. If you go back to this case now more than 8 years now, and these convicted criminals, including the respected chairman of the BNP, Khaleda Zia, she was fighting this one with her lawyers for last 8 years. And they changes, they take the time 139 times, and they changes the judges 4 times. At the end of the day, the Supreme Court justice asked them to give the name of a judge so that who can take this justice. So I 100% sure nobody is above the law, and it is a law of the land, and she was convicted because she was mishandling the fund from the orphans.
Okay, so Mohidur Rahman, they say there's no smoke without fire. Even if this didn't stick, there are 37 other cases. Are you absolutely convinced that she's completely innocent with regards all of these cases, almost 40?
100%, I'm absolutely convinced because I am totally aware of all the cases, what has been, how it has been filed up. During the 111 government led by Fakhruddin and Mo in military-backed government, these cases were filed against the 2 political party leaders and activists in order to eliminate the political activists and leaders from the -2 theory. That was done. I want to remind my friend on the opposite side that he said that no one is above the law. I think in Bangladesh, Hasina and her ministers are above the law, because Sheikh Hasina had got more than 15 cases were filed up against her, and when she took the oath of the Prime Minister, being unelected, she used her all the executive influence to get rid of all these cases from the court, and all the judiciary system is politicized. It is not me telling; it is the whole Bangladesh, the whole world community knows that the Bangladeshi judges, including the Chief Justice, were not spared. He was forcefully, resigned from the position, and he was thrown out of the country. So the position of the Supreme Court, position of the judges in Bangladesh, the special judge court has been set up for Khaleda Zia to hurry the cases, to disqualify her and the Tariq Rahman from the forthcoming election.
Fair enough. If you'll allow me, right? Interestingly, there might be some evidence supporting your theory, but the other way around, because what we heard from Judge Muhammad Akhtaruzzaman, he said he was satisfied that the court had proved the charges against Zia, but he said actually she got special treatment because of her status. He said the sentence had been made more lenient than it would have been otherwise. Considering her social and physical status, Zia has been sentenced to 5 years in jail, i.e. we went softly on her because of her status and because she's a big opposition leader and she comes from political royalty. So maybe the courts are influenced by the politics, but in your favor.
No. Can I just contribute to this question? Actually, these cases are not related to any government fund or public fund. These were donated by His Excellency the Amir of Kuwait to help the orphanage in Bangladesh in the name of Ziaur Rahman Trust, and this money has not been touched. This money rather been accrued with the interest. It has become double the amount of money. It is nearly 7 crore now. So basically, this money is still lying in the account. They can't prove anything. Even the Begum Khaleda Zia's lawyer have been saying that. But the problem is that they are trying to put verdict by force, because the country has no law and order situation in Bangladesh. It has become a police state. People have got no spaces for assembly, free gathering, or raising their voice against the undemocratic or unruly behavior of the government. Atrocity. The thousands of people have been taken into jail, have been arrested.
Okay, so you're building a general atmosphere.
8th of January.
Okay, fair enough. So you're building a general atmosphere.
Yeah,
So let me ask Yusuf Salim. Yusuf Salim, for those who say...
You can see the opinion of the people. People are crying in Bangladesh. This is an unfair justice has been given.
Certainly, and that's how you feel, and that's
totally politically motivated.
And that's how Zia's supporters feel, and you're undoubtedly one of her supporters. Yusuf Salim.
Not only the Zia supporters, the Bangladeshi people.
Fair enough, that's your position.
Lots of people have come out on the street.
Okay, fair enough, lots, but I don't think you can say it's all of Bangladesh. Yusuf Salim, let me add to that with a question here. For those who say, conveniently, now, they call them the battling Begums, right? I didn't make that up. They've been using that for decades now. For those who say, isn't it convenient that you have her arch nemesis who's banged up on these charges, and in the bigger scheme of things, it's about $250,000. It's a lot of money in Bangladesh, yes, but we're not talking about millions or tens of millions of dollars. For those who say, isn't it convenient that Sheikh Hasina's biggest rival, biggest enemy is banged up on these charges just ahead of an election? That's interesting. Don't they have a point?
That it is nothing to do with the politics, because Madam Khaleda Zia has got the record of criminal activities. If you can remember, at the time of a caretaker government in 2006, she declared her illegal income to declare it as a white money, from black money to white money. She did it paying the government commission and declared her illegal money to legalize this money. And according to as you said, as a corrupt politician like Madam Khaleda Zia should not be above the law, because she is the role model for her follower. So maybe that is a small amount, 2 crore rupees or 2 crore taka is a small amount, but she was involved in so many other criminal activities and money laundering. Even if you can remember, her one son was convicted in Singapore, and government got about 30 million sterling pound back from this Singapore. And another son in this country, in England, they were convicted in a Bangladeshi court 7 years. And they should not be allowed to do the things from abroad because they are not facing death sentences. They should go to the country of origin and face all these charges.
Okay.
And
very
as
finally,
they are the role model of the people,
and point
they
well
should
made.
not be above the law and they should face the justice.
Very finally, I want to look forward for a second here. Mohidur Rahman, what are your options? She's been convicted. People are taking to the streets. We've seen clashes. What is the BNP going to do? Are you going to go and protest on the streets? Might it get ugly on the streets?
Well, the thing is that my friend on the other side is saying that nobody is above the law. I just raised the question that all this corruption that has been done under the present regime, the unelected regime led by Sheikh Hasina, all her ministers, Padma Bridge corruption, quick rental corruption, hallmark corruption, share market corruptions, thousands of crores of taka has been looted from the banks, state banks, Reserve banks, Bangladesh Bank, and all these things. Who is filing cases against the government? Because government is right at this moment, their political agenda is to create one-party rule in Bangladesh, not multi-party system of democracy. We believe in inclusive politics. BNP has been demanding a free and fair election in the country for the last 9 years, but government is not giving a damn towards our demand and request. We are a peace-loving political party. We believe in democracy, and that is why our leader, before she went to the court, she has given to her last speech that whatever you do, it should be peaceful and within the framework of the law. But unfortunately, I am saying again and again, these all the cases against Begum Khaleda Zia, these are politically motivated just to pursue her to come to the next election, which has been set up by Sheikh Hasina, so that she can come back to the power again, by getting a legality. If the BNP participate in the election, obviously that will be a legitimate election. Like 5th January 2014 election, it was not a legitimate election. And under this illegitimate government, no law is legal. No, nothing is legal in Bangladesh. And Sheikh Hasina's cases should be brought into justice. All these BDR killings and everything. They are saying criminals.
Gentlemen, we're going to get you on the program again.
Criminal activity is done by this present government, not Begum Khaleda Zia. Because Khaleda Zia is not in power for the last 9 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've got to wrap. I have to move on. We're going to get you both on the program again in the not too distant future. Okay, Mohidur Rahman and Muhammad Yusuf Salim. It's been good to get both sides of the political aisle on the show here. I thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Thank you for inviting us. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
As a coalition, we are not in the business of nation building or reconstruction. We must ensure that our respective nations' precious and limited resources are devoted to preventing the resurgence of ISIS and equipping the war-torn communities to take the lead in rebuilding their institutions and returning to stability.
Iraq has been crippled by conflict. For years, the country has had to deal with a brutal battle against Daesh. Now the terror group has been defeated, it's time to rebuild. And Iraq's prime minister says it needs up to $100 billion. But will Baghdad get as much help as it needs? This week, a conference is being held in Kuwait to fund the reconstruction. And while the US is set to attend, sources in Washington say they won't commit to anything financially. But should they? Well, one man with plenty of experience when it comes to Iraq is retired US Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. He joins me now in the studio. Good to have you on the Newsmakers again, General Kimmitt. So, why is it the case that we have this Kuwait conference and Washington doesn't really want to contribute any funds to reconstruction? Is that a mistake?
Well, first of all, I think that's an unfair criticism. The United States has helped significantly with stabilization and humanitarian assistance. Most recently, this year and last year, about $2 billion. We are not saying we don't want to help with reconstruction. However, more than likely that will not be as donor grants, but as investment. Iraq's a great place to operate. It's open for business. So rather than let government funds help with the reconstruction, we know that governments are horrible at these kind of programs. Let's let the private industry do this instead with investment projects.
But Haider Al-abadi is not calling for $100 billion of investment in the country. That's a separate thing. They're calling for aid, for reconstruction aid. And for those who have followed Iraq from 2003, you would agree that the United States has been the fundamental player here. You break it, you buy it. Come on, you were involved in smashing it up. Even if you believe it was righteous that you smashed it up when Saddam was overthrown and so on. So come on, man, chip in.
Well, we're not talking about bringing no money into Iraq. And it may very well be the case that the Secretary of State does announce some grants and donations. But look at this administration. This is an administration back in the Washington, D.C. that says, we're not in the business of nation building. Let's do what we do best. Let's let investors go in, bring the money in, and get a good return on their money. Take a look at President Trump, a businessman. Secretary of State Tillerson, a businessman. They don't believe in nation building. They do believe in national investment.
There's talk of trying to get the Saudis to contribute to try and isolate the Iranians and get the Iraqis to move towards the Saudis. Would that be the way to go?
Well, that's a different matter entirely. We encourage the Saudis to invest in Iraq, whether it's in the form of private investment or government donations. If there are some political or geostrategic alignments that come with that money, that's an issue for the Saudis to determine themselves.
Something that you said at the very beginning, you said that governments are terrible at dealing with this money. Do you not trust the Iraqi government with hundreds of millions of dollars?
Well, let's be clear. We've had concerns for years and years about the corruption inside of Iraq. But I don't think you're going to get that money, that private money, to come into Iraq unless they believe that money is generally free of corrupting influences and they can get an adequate return. Look, I do that all the time. I am in Iraq to bring private money to get an adequate return. We think that Iraq is a great place to invest, a frontier market, and those risks of corruption, of lack of financial transparency, this is what companies do around the world, and for that they expect a reasonable return.
Is what the Trump administration is saying now, and we heard Secretary of State Tillerson speaking about the fact that we are not involved in nation building. You're there, you're fighting still at times. Daesh is defeated, but of course people are a little bit wary. What does this say about the United States in Iraq and the United States in the Middle East in general? Is this another indication of the U.S. kind of extricating itself as a government from the region?
Well, I don't think so at all. We're working side by side with over 70 nations to address the ISIL threat. We don't believe we're going anywhere inside of Iraq. We may change our military dispositions. We certainly aren't going to change our diplomatic responsibilities, nor are we going to change. In fact, we may be even encouraging far more investment, private investment, into the country that you're seeing now. So we are in Iraq for the long term. The manner and the style of that investment will take different forms over the years.
So again, just to kind of reiterate, for those who read the headline and they say Iraq is having a donors conference and the U.S. doesn't want to contribute money to rebuilding Iraq, and they ask, aren't they absolving themselves of their fundamental responsibility to help the Iraqi people? You believe that's false?
I certainly do. I think people need to read beyond the headline. We are helping significantly with humanitarian assistance, getting rid of those IEDs that you see around the country. We are heavily involved in the stabilization. But when it comes to the reconstruction, there's a good place for donor funding, which some nations want to do, and there's the right place for investment. Rather than have the governments do it, let's unleash the private markets to help out inside of Iraq.
Okay, General Kimmett, thanks for joining us again on the Newsmakers.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Next time, has the Philippines' war on drugs made its president a criminal? We debate an investigation opened up by the International Criminal Court. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.